Welcome to War Bios, where we delve into the complexities of military history's most pivotal battles. Today, we're going to explore one of the most decisive conflicts of the Napoleonic Wars, the Battle of Jena-Auerstedt, fought on October 14, 1806. This battle marked a watershed moment in European history, as Napoleon's Grande Armée clashed with the Prussian army, resulting in a crushing defeat that would have far-reaching consequences for the continent. In the early 19th century, Europe was ablaze with conflict, as Napoleon's ambitions threatened to engulf the entire continent. The Prussian kingdom, under the leadership of King Frederick William III, had long been wary of French expansionism, and by 1806, tensions between the two nations had reached a boiling point. The once mighty Prussian army, still basking in the glory of Frederick the Great's military legacy, was about to face its greatest challenge. In August 1806, Napoleon, ever the master strategist, began to mobilize his forces for a campaign against Prussia. He knew that a swift and decisive victory was essential to crushing the Prussian army and securing his hold on Central Europe. With his characteristic attention to detail, Napoleon meticulously planned every aspect of the campaign, from the deployment of his troops to the logistics of supply and communication. Meanwhile, the Prussians, confident in their military traditions and the legacy of Frederick the Great, were preparing to face the French challenge. At the helm of the Prussian army stood the Duke of Brunswick, a seasoned commander who had fought against the French during the Wars of the Revolution. However, despite his experience, Brunswick was hamstrung by the Prussian military's outdated tactics and organizational structure, which emphasized rigid discipline and adherence to traditional protocols over flexibility and adaptability. The Prussians were still wedded to the linear tactics of the 18th century, with its emphasis on densely packed formations and volley fire, whereas the French had adopted more flexible and maneuverable tactics, leveraging the power of speed, surprise, and decisive action. As the French army advanced into German territory, Napoleon employed his characteristic speed and maneuverability to outflank and disorient the Prussians. He divided his forces into several corps, each with a specific objective, and set them in motion towards the Prussian positions around Jena and Auerstedt. The French army was a finely tuned machine, with each component working in harmony to achieve Napoleon's strategic goals. His generals, men like Marshal Louis-Nicolas Davout and Marshal Jean Lannes, were seasoned veterans who understood the importance of initiative, adaptability, and bold action on the battlefield. In contrast, the Prussians were struggling to respond effectively to the French threat. Their army was dispersed across a wide area, with different corps operating under separate commanders, leading to confusion and a lack of coordination. The Duke of Brunswick, aware of the gravity of the situation, attempted to concentrate his forces around Jena, but Napoleon's relentless pressure forced him to adjust his plans repeatedly. As the Prussian army stumbled from one crisis to another, its leaders were faced with an unpalatable truth. Their military was no match for the French in terms of speed, maneuverability, and tactical innovation. As the French army closed in on the Prussian positions around Jena and Auerstedt, Napoleon's strategic vision became increasingly evident. He had deliberately divided his forces to exploit the weaknesses of the Prussian army, which was still struggling to respond effectively to the French threat. The Prussians, led by the Duke of Brunswick, were attempting to concentrate their forces in preparation for a decisive battle, but Napoleon's speed and maneuverability had caught them off guard. On October 13, 1806, the day before the battle, Napoleon issued a series of directives to his corps commanders, outlining their objectives and emphasizing the importance of speed and surprise. He gathered his generals around him, his eyes burning with intensity as he explained the plan. "We must strike quickly and decisively," he urged. As the sun rose on October 14, 1806, the French army launched a devastating attack on the Prussian positions around Jena. Marshal Jean Lannes's corps led the assault, with his troops advancing rapidly across the open terrain east of Jena. The air was crisp and cool, with a hint of mist still clinging to the ground. The sound of drums and bugles filled the air as the French infantry moved forward in formation, their bayonets glinting in the morning light. The Prussians, still deploying their forces, were caught off guard by the ferocity and speed of the French attack. As Lannes's troops closed in on the Prussian lines, they unleashed a hail of artillery fire and musketry that shattered the enemy formations. The Prussian soldiers, many of whom were inexperienced and poorly trained, wavered under the intense pressure. Their officers, attempting to rally them, were often cut down by French sharpshooters or trampled by their own fleeing troops. Meanwhile, Marshal Louis Nicolas Davout's corps was engaged in a fierce battle around Auerstedt, several miles to the north of Jena. Davout's troops had been tasked with defeating the main Prussian army under the command of the Duke of Brunswick, and they were determined to succeed. Despite being outnumbered, Davout's corps fought with remarkable tenacity, using their superior training and tactical flexibility to outmaneuver the Prussians. As the battle raged on, Napoleon himself rode onto the battlefield, directing his troops and making key decisions that would ultimately determine the outcome of the conflict. He was a master of the battlefield, able to read the ebb and flow of the fighting with uncanny accuracy. At one point, he came across a group of French soldiers who were hesitating in the face of heavy Prussian fire. According to eyewitness accounts, Napoleon rallied the troops with a stirring speech, urging them to press forward and seize the initiative. "Soldats, vous êtes les maîtres du champ de bataille," he exclaimed. "Soldiers, you are the masters of the battlefield." His voice was like thunder, shaking the very foundations of the earth. The French soldiers, inspired by their leader's words, surged forward with renewed confidence and energy. The French army's momentum was unstoppable, and by mid-morning on October 14, the Prussians were in full retreat. The Duke of Brunswick's army had been shattered, with thousands of soldiers killed or wounded, and many more taken prisoner. As the French pursued the fleeing Prussians, they encountered scenes of utter chaos and devastation: abandoned artillery pieces, overturned wagons, and the bodies of the dead and dying littering the landscape. One of the most striking aspects of the Battle of Jena-Auerstedt was the complete collapse of the Prussian army's command structure. As their units disintegrated under French pressure, the Prussian commanders were unable to respond effectively, and their orders were often ignored or disobeyed by their demoralized troops. In contrast, the French army's chain of command remained intact throughout the battle, with Napoleon and his generals issuing clear directives that were rapidly executed by their subordinates. As the Prussian army retreated in disarray, Napoleon's forces pursued them relentlessly, pushing deep into Prussian territory like a juggernaut that couldn't be stopped. The French emperor's strategic genius was on full display as he exploited the weaknesses of his enemy, using speed and maneuver to outflank and overwhelm the Prussians at every turn. By the end of October 1806, the Prussian army had ceased to exist as a cohesive force, its remnants fleeing in panic or surrendering en masse, leaving behind a trail of abandoned equipment, deserted camps, and shattered morale. The landscape itself seemed to bear witness to the devastation, with the rolling hills and verdant forests of Prussia now scarred by the ravages of war. The once proud Prussian cavalry, renowned for their discipline and élan, were now reduced to scattered groups of fugitives, desperately seeking escape from the all-conquering French army. In the aftermath of the battle, Napoleon's army occupied key cities and fortresses across Prussia, including Berlin, which fell on October 24. The French emperor's victory was so complete that he was able to dictate terms to the Prussian government, imposing a harsh treaty that forced Prussia to cede significant territory and pay massive indemnities. As Napoleon himself observed, the Battle of Jena was a thunderclap that shook the whole of Europe, and its consequences would be felt for years to come, shaping the destiny of nations and empires alike. One of the most striking aspects of Napoleon's campaign was his masterful use of speed and maneuver to outflank and overwhelm the Prussians. By advancing rapidly along multiple axes, he was able to create a sense of uncertainty and confusion among the enemy, making it difficult for them to respond effectively to the French army's movements. This approach, which would later become known as the Napoleonic method, relied on a combination of rapid marches, clever deception, and decisive battle to shatter the enemy's will to resist. As the great military historian Karl von Clausewitz would later write, the campaign of 1806 was a masterpiece of strategic art, and its lessons would be studied by generals for generations to come. The Battle of Jena-Auerstedt marked a turning point in European history, as it cemented French dominance over the continent and paved the way for Napoleon's further conquests. The battle also had a profound impact on the development of military tactics and strategy, as it demonstrated the effectiveness of speed, maneuver, and combined arms warfare. The human cost of the war was staggering, with thousands of Prussian soldiers killed or wounded in the fighting, and countless civilians displaced or affected by the conflict. The legacy of Jena-Auerstedt would be felt for generations to come, shaping the course of European history and leaving an indelible mark on the collective memory of the continent. The battle is commemorated in numerous memorials and museums across Europe, including the Napoleonic Museum in Berlin, which houses an extensive collection of artifacts and exhibits related to the battle. Despite the passage of time, the legacy of Jena-Auerstedt continues to fascinate historians and military enthusiasts alike, offering valuable insights into the art of war and the nature of leadership. That's all for today's War Bios. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, I'm General Biography reminding you to keep marching toward victory.